our speaker today. Andrew leads the All Data AI Research Group at Microsoft Research Cambridge. He has done lots of amazing work during his career, and one of the highlights is on 3D vision, he was the main contributor to the Emmy-award-winning 3D camera tracker Boujou and the Kinect for Xbox 360. He has won many awards and accolades for his work, including 10 Best Paper Awards, Silver Medal of Royal Academy of Engineering, and BCS Roger Needham Award. He is the Fellow of Royal Academy of Engineering, the British Computer Society, and the International Association for Pattern Recognition. I consider myself lucky that he's my mentor for my fellowship, and we are really happy to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Fitzgibbon.
Thank you very much. It's very, very nice to be here. Hello. I think the very first project I did in my PhD was the layered project. Do you remember that? Which was, people in this room worked on, and that was something to do with 3D vision. Sorry, let me push this. So I'm going to talk today about taking research and putting it into practice. And I'll start with, this is just a tiny number of people who worked with me on this work. Throughout the talk, I will say I, and I don't mean I mean them. But so it's a speech defect. So I'll start with my conclusion slide. And my conclusion slide is this: don't get excited about equations, right? I'll have equations in my talk. I won't have any theorems, because there aren't any in computer vision or machine learning, right? They're just like observations. And what I really want you to do is, if you really want to annoy me, when I ask what you're working on, you can say, I work on theory. I do theoretical machine learning, right? For me, making something real is the only way you've done something good. I could have done a maths PhD, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago, 20 years ago, why didn't you do a maths PhD? I would have said, because I was scared. Yes, I do a little bit of computer vision, but I don't, because my student, Ben Biggs, does computer vision. I do a little bit of kind of neuroscience stuff, where I'm really just helping out some neuroscientists. And I do a lot of stuff on computer programming, so programming languages, automatic differentiation, and numerical analysis. So basically, I don't do computer vision anymore, but I'm going to tell you all about my life in computer vision. What I do since April is I lead a research group at Microsoft Cambridge, a research theme, which is called All Data AI. It's a little bit of a clumsy acronym, but you'll see that it spells ADA. And what did Ada Lovelace do? If you can have arguments about who wrote the program and who did this and who did that, but Ada Lovelace made this observation. She made the observation that the difference engine, which they all assumed would be fantastic for computing the trajectories of missiles to hit French people, was actually going to be capable of dealing with things like music and language and pictures. So somehow she had that inspiration, days after the first computer was existed. What do we do in All Data AI? We do this. We think about the tensor era of machine learning. Starts with, so why did the world change in 2012? The world changed in 2012 because Alex Krzyzewski took a 20-year-old model, the convolutional neural network, engineered the hell out of it on his new GPU, and made it run 1,000 times faster. Right? That's what actually happened. And then because it ran 1,000 times faster, he was able to train it 1,000 times longer. And it turns out that gradient descent with 10,000 steps is a bit better than gradient descent with 10 steps. And suddenly the world changed, right? We had a real revolution in what we could do with computers in terms of images. That revolution extended to speech fairly soon. It's no coincidence that speech is basically a set of two-dimensional. You may think of speech as a 1D signal, but everybody first processes it to be essentially a sequence of matrices. And we learned to think to turn every one of our problems into a big block of numbers. And, I get really annoyed if you tell me I work on theory. I used to get really annoyed with this stupid word tensor, but I'm over it now. So you can say tensor all the time. It's really exciting, isn't it? Good word, tensor. Sounds, you sound clever if you're working on tensor. But that's the tensor era, and the more we move to applications like AI on computer programs or machine learning on computer programs, which is something I work on a lot at the moment, machine learning on molecules, or even something that might look like a matrix. We're trying to do machine learning on Excel spreadsheets. The Excel spreadsheet looks like a block of numbers, but inside it there's a complicated graph of interactions between the thing, the formulae and the cells and so on. You might not think it's a good idea to go to 1970s on sentence parsing and to first build a tree structure, but if you do, you get incredible improvements in efficiency. So trees, graphs are the kind of data structures that my group is good at. Why is it called all data? Because we also talk about small data. If you're Microsoft, you might think, or Google, you might think, wouldn't it be great if I trained a machine learning algorithm on the entire Gmail corpus, right? Well, no, it wouldn't, because when I come up and type to autocomplete my email, I might type to myself, Adrian Hilton's salary is, and wait for the autocomplete to fill it in, right? I cannot learn from your inbox something that I'm going to use on mine. Nobody knows how to do that privacy-preserving machine learning. Oh, they have theorems about it, but nobody knows how to do it, right? The theorems are irrelevant. So we often have the situation where we have tiny data. A new user comes in with a new inbox. How many mails are in there? 0. Well, there's one mail saying, welcome to Microsoft or something. So you have to quickly spin up your models from tiny amounts of data, and that's what I call small data. And you have to do it on millions and millions of inboxes. So it's big data, small data, all data, AI. Anyway, that's what I'm doing at the moment. We're always hiring. We're hiring people who don't care about the research engineer boundary. We're hiring people who love mathematics and who love coding. I'm tempted to ask who loves C++, but I won't. You can tell me later. I wrote some C++ the other day. So good. So what did I do before I worked on all data? I'm going to tell you my life story, but kind of in reverse. I worked on this device. Who knows about this device? Oh, quite a few people. Okay. So, person is wearing the HoloLens. This is the field of view of V1. It's a bit bigger now. And then I won't show you this video of it playing, because I'll show you this video from February. Quite long, but...
Look at this. Fully articulated hand tracking. And as I move my hand...
Julia here is an engineer. She's also amazing on stage.
And of course, not only does the HoloLens 2 recognize me and my hands, it also recognizes the world. Welcome to my mixed reality home. This is the place where I have all the apps and content that I use every day. Let's check some of them out. Now, I've seen many people put on HoloLens for the first time, and the first thing people do when they put on the device is they reach out their hands and try and touch the holograms. And now, you can.
It's really good. I'll go forward. So, obviously this is a rendering of the world she's seeing from another camera. Pretty much everything here is in her field of view, and obviously it's a bit Princess Leia. Who has tried the HoloLens? Quite a few people. Good. Oh, do you have some here? No? Yeah? Yeah. Anyway, so this is V2, fully articulated hand tracking. And the main part, the sort of technical part of my talk will be about blue skies research, stuff we did with no real idea why we were doing it, except learn more about 3D stuff, turning into something that we actually can ship and run on a device which runs in like hundreds of milliwatts, 500 megahertz, tiny little processor. It says blue skies. It should probably be more blue seas research to products. So we started trying to do clownfish because they had well-defined edges on them, and we could do something to get 3D structure out of well-defined edges of deforming objects. I'll go into some detail about learning the shape of dolphins, where Tom Cashman told me about subdivision surfaces. Who has used subdivision surfaces? Oh, some. Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That was interesting because I was very much in a polygon world, and Tom persuaded me to do better, and that helped. We realized dolphins were a bit boring, so we went on to hands and did a few, sort of papers on hand tracking and hand modeling, and then went dark for a few years and started to work on the HoloLens. So I'm going to tell you a bit about that. But before I do that, as I said, I'm telling the story in reverse. I'm going to tell you my life story, right? So I grew up in Cork in Ireland, which hopefully is still present somewhat in my accent. And I had a brilliant job when I was at school, which was water taxi driver, which is basically incredibly busy from 9 a.m. till 11 a.m. when you're taking people to their boats. And then they all go out sailing for the day, and then incredibly busy from like 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And in between, you can just like write code. And this is the writing code action from 1986, because, not because, you know, it was the mainframe or anything, it's just that I had a Spectrum at home, but I couldn't plug it in on the boat. So I just, you know, wrote little programs and then typed them in when I got home. That was a lot of fun. I went to Edinburgh to do a master's. This was, again, I wasn't sure about this maths business. So I was in a topology lecture and thought maybe this would be useful for character recognition. So I went to Heriot-Watt to do a master's in computer vision. And then I thought, there's no way I'm going to do a PhD. So I got a job as a programmer in the university, which is where I met some of these folks. And then sort of halfway through being a programmer, I sort of accidentally published some papers. So they gave me a PhD after 7 or 8 years of that. And I was completely obsessed with the two-dimensional shape, which is the ellipse. I thought, you know, if you're going to do lines, the next thing to do is ellipse. Actually, I'm going to do a little off-piste excursion here. Here's how something has changed completely in the 21st century. So, more off-piste. You'll hear me saying annoying things like, I don't believe in complex numbers, or Fourier series, or any of that nonsense from the 16th to 20th centuries, right? I'll try to explain what I mean. Here's some data, right? How do you do machine learning? How do you do any analysis of data, right? Well, you squint at the data, and you think of a model that might generate the data, right? That's one way you can do it. So you might say, I think this model was generated by y equals ax plus b, right? And then you might say, I wonder what a and b are. Well, what I'll do is minimize over a and b, you know, the sum over some training examples of the difference between the y value of that example and the xi. Right? So that might be a sensible thing to do, and then you would get out the a and b, and you'd be happy. Right? If I, put some outliers there, then you might say, ooh, 2 isn't going to do it. I heard a theorem about 1 being really good. Right? Turns out 1 is kind of useless in any dimension above 1. It's good to do 0.7 then. That's a good number. Okay. So 2 things happened when I casually went from 2 to 1. So 2 is done by Gauss in whatever, 1800 or something. No, it's much earlier. Anyway, whatever. So minimization of squares is done, now I think it's 1650. Anyway, whatever. L1 was done before, 10 years before least squares. So that's surprising. 0.7 you can only do using a nonlinear optimizer. Today, I make my unfortunate interns do 2 and 1 using a nonlinear optimizer. Right? Always do a nonlinear optimizer, it'll be faster, or it'll be like 2x slower. And the point is, you could suddenly change your model from 1 to 0.7 or 2. Right? Whereas when I was in my PhD, changing this number to 0.7, or changing it to a robust kernel, whoops. Oh, where's it gone? Oh, it's all gone. Right. Oh dear, that was annoying, wasn't it? Right, I still got to leave that there. Why I? Yeah, 0.7. Changing that number from 2 to 1 was like, oh no, I need to read a whole load of new books. And changing the number from 2 to 0.7, I never did, because I was too scared. Right? I thought, well, nonlinear optimization, it's going to be thousands of times too slow. Turns out it isn't. At the same time, some really clever recent work. What's the contour plot, what's the plot of L2 norm, you know, is like a quadratic. L1, you know, is like a V. 0.7, you know, is shaped a bit like that. I'm assuming most of you know this. Who knows that 0.7 is shaped a bit like that? Everybody, because I just told you. Right? Boy, am I gone off piece. Here's my point. I've shown you this lump of data, and you've said, I think AX plus B. And then I'm going to show you this lump of data, right? And you might say, I'm pretty sure I'm going to write that as y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, right? Finally, I show you this lump of data. I've got lovely Jupyter notebooks of this. And you might say to yourself, I see where he's going here, right? I see that he's talking about y equals ax cubed plus, right? And this is the point at which I say that is 20th century and before thinking. The correct function, I would say today, to model this data is this. Y equals if x less than threshold ax squared plus a1x squared plus b1x plus c1 else a2x squared plus b2x plus c2. Piecewise definition, right? It says chop up your input domain into pieces and use simple functions here. And you might naturally say to me, but Andrew, if you're really going to believe yourself, then you should knock out the x squared as well, right? And you're right, I should, right? I should just have more branches in my if and just have linear segments, right? Or you could say to me, why don't you use ReLU as your basis function? And suddenly you get, the way deep learning works, right? So deep learning is paring it down, modern deep learning. I think for me, ReLU, Krzyzewski making the code fast was really important. ReLU is amazing. The fact that ReLU works, look, the scary derivative here, no one cares, right? Just works, right? I think is amazing change in our thinking about what we should do. Anyway, that's where I think we should go. I'm going to spend the rest of the talk doing stuff with quadratics and quartics and old school, but that's fine. Okay, I said, sorry, wrong way. I said I would talk about making computer vision systems that work. So I'm going to tell you a story about a computer vision startup from 1998, where I was working in Oxford with Zisserman, and we discovered that if you could put a highly textured, but we know that we're vision people, right? If you could put a highly textured object on a turntable and spin it around and do some point tracking and do some nice octree stuff and some nice solving mathematical thingies with nonlinear optimization, then you can get a beautiful rendering of the 3D points of the object and the positions of the cameras, and given the positions of the cameras, you can make a nice 3D model. We devoted some effort to making nice graphics. We devoted effort, and this is still good today, because I don't often see this done, to doing the sub-pixel marching cube, so the sub-voxel marching cube. So make sure that when you segment the object, you get a kind of a gray transition. You're doing sub-pixel transitions, then do sub-pixel marching cubes. And the goodness of doing that is that here is one of the 36 input images that is used to pull out the dinosaur model. So you can see that maybe that's about 50 pixels from top to bottom. This is the recovered 3D model, which you can see is maybe got 1,000 polys worth from top to bottom. So you have massive super resolution if you just engineer the hell out of it, right, and get down to 10 milliradian resolution or whatever we got down to. I just think sub-pixel is a bit undervalued today if you want to pull stuff out of images. It's great. So this is a story of a startup. So we thought this was amazing, right? We had novelty in that we could go uncalibrated video, so you just sat it on the turntable, spun it around, and you could pull out VRML. It's still true today, right? 20 years later, you show somebody a 3D model, and it's just intrinsically cool, right, to see 3D stuff. Most importantly, because we are constrained to the turntable, we kind of had an idea that we could actually build something where you would put 3D models on a turntable and it would work, right, rather than random computer vision paper of the time or of today. And it turns out it's completely useless, this object, right? So who cares about making 3D models of real stuff? Two industries, movies and cars, and a bunch of other design, right, where people make stuff out of, what do they make it out of? Clay, right? So clay, a small textured object, just doesn't have any texture on it, so we couldn't get feature points. we had this idea that we needed a blue screen to get the segmentation. But once you've set up a blue screen and a motor-driven turntable, you may as well just calibrate the thing, right? You've already got a load of infrastructure, so it doesn't help to do clever mathematics or clever computer vision. Just build the thing, engineer the hell out of it, and it'll be fine. So it was essentially completely useless, and we went to lots of lovely special effects houses in Soho, and they told us how clever we were and how uninterested they were in buying anything from us. Except that one of them kind of looked back at the this video, which is a bit like a look into what the system is doing, and said, how did you get these cameras? How did you recover those? And we said, oh yeah, it's a byproduct. You have to get the cameras and the points. It's like simultaneous, you know, localization and mapping, structure and motion. So they said, oh, could you, like, I don't know, you know, take a video of somebody walking around an office and then turn it into a map of that office with the camera trajectory, and, you know, who has used Boujou? Has anyone used this program? Some must have, yeah. So we built this program which tracks 2D feature points. Half the people in the room probably never seen classical computer vision before. Is that, is that the case? Yeah. So you build a little image processing operator which likes high contrast. You thread them together, the 2D features. You solve a system of equations which says, that must have been given rise to by some 3D explanation of the same points. Now imagine how disappointed we were when we first saw this, when our goal was to build beautiful 3D models of Oxford, right? We devoted so much effort to trying to, like, link with triangles these points. And we were ignoring the fact that we had quite a nice camera trajectory represented here by this red line and the view of the camera moving along it. And also, although this was useless structure for doing 3D reconstruction, you can see the wall of the building there, and this person is about to select the few points which represent the wall of the building. So when they go into the next view, same thing again, but bigger. So when they go into the next view, they can say, place this virtual object so that it's attached to the wall. Right? And now it turns out that that useless structure for building 3D models is a great structure for sticking ladybirds into the sequence. And this is the thing that is very useful to people in the world. It's funny to see, at the time, you might look at that and say, well, couldn't I just get an animator to, like, click the ladybird every 10 frames? Wouldn't it be fine? So what I'm displaying here is I'm flicking on and off the video background. And what you can see is, when you see video, it looks, the ladybird looks perfectly stuck there, right? There's no, you know, it looks fine. It looks like it's stuck on. But yet it turns out that actually it's jumping all over the place. So it was really expensive back then. This was Jurassic Park era. Who has seen Jurassic Park, the first one? So good, right? Still, it's like a moonshot. It's like one of those things, if we tried to make it again, you know, they almost made it too good. The second Jurassic Park is nowhere near as good. Yeah. And then, of course, this is useful because if you want to have a school of children and put virtual candles above them, then it's useful to be able to know the camera motion for that. So that was successful. We got an Emmy, etc., as somebody said. But I think the key there, two key there's. First of all, we had something we knew we could make work. That's good. And the second thing is determine if anyone actually wants to buy it. Right? So you just, because the other thing, we thought we were going to do robotics, that didn't work out, models, that didn't work out. We were lucky. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story of another productisation that I was involved in. So in 2004, I moved to Microsoft. I was kind of bored with the rigid world. So all this Boujou stuff works, providing nothing in the scene is moving. The best it could do was ignore things. So in that short clip I showed you, there's a bicyclist. There's some bicyclists driving in front of the camera. And what the system does is cleverly tries to ignore them. So we were really interested in, could we do something with more dynamic objects? Right? So the obvious thing to do is try to, you know, get a nice, simple system. So we found some video on the internet of a man or person in black doing exercises, extracted the silhouette, used a Gaussian process latent variable model, which was all the rage back then, to you know, get decent tracking of the human motion. Right? So that was a decent result. You know, shortlist Mar Prize in 2007. Oh yeah, we never solved the Footscate. So that was great. So we published this paper, and around the same time, the people in Microsoft said, hey, they didn't even know we were doing this. They just said, hey, I know you do computer vision stuff. Can you give me a body tracker? And I was like, okay, well, you know, we are the world expert on body tracking. But this takes a minute of frame on a PC of the era. And they said we wanted to run on the Xbox. And then they said, and of course you're not going to be wearing any funny suits, right? It's just going to be ordinary people, you know, it's going to be real time. And we wanted not real time on the Xbox. Remember, the Xbox 360 is designed in 2003, so it's by then it was an old machine. But we needed 10x real time because we actually need the games to run on the Xbox rather than just the hardware. And you need to do 4 people. I think we only ever got to 2. But suddenly it was like, are you insane? You know, this is the state of the art in the academic literature, is like 1 minute per frame on a big machine for one person, maybe. So I am definitely guilty, I and Andrew Blake are both guilty of saying, you're so lucky, Microsoft, that you've got a research team like us. Because we can tell you, we can save you $1 billion by telling you this is impossible. Give up the project now, and you'll save all the money. And we sat back, very proud of ourselves. Sadly, we didn't think about Jamie Shotton, who was younger than us, and who had other ideas. They did say, oh, you've got a depth camera, and that was pretty exciting. Because that means that this whole segmentation thing is actually good. The main thing a depth camera is good for, it's good for 2 things. I'll tell you one first. The first thing it's really, really good for is giving you a clean segmentation. The issue about actually telling you the distance in front of the camera, not so much of a bother. That's hardly used in Kinect games, the fact that you're a certain distance, because you know it doesn't really matter. So we were, you know, we thought, okay, maybe, but still, it's not going to work very well. You know, we looked at some lovely videos. So then we said, okay, depth camera, I think we can do it, maybe. But if you're going to do this, you're going to need to, I don't know, go to 10 different households, right? 1 in Japan, 1 in Germany, don't just go to America. You're going to have to take your camera and you're going to have to video people pretending to play with this thing that hasn't yet been invented. You know, it's going to cost lots. And we were fine thinking, oh, they'll never do it. And of course, you know, 2 weeks later, somebody rings up and says, right, I'm in a house in Japan. Does it matter which way the camera is pointing? It's like, yeah, try and jiggle it a bit. Try and go backwards and forwards. You know, so that was like, okay, they're really serious. Then the next thing we said is, all right, if this is going to work, we're going to need, you know, the next thing we tried to stop them was saying, okay, we're going to need like 1 million training images. You know, you'll never get that. You need like a Hollywood studio to go and generate training images using state-of-the-art, you know, artists, paying artists and graphics people. So of course they did. And then we were really stuck because it needed to work. So what do we know? We knew this. Jamie knew this. Jamie knew how to take images, RGB images, and segment them into categories with sort of, I don't know, 80% accuracy, whatever it was a decision forest method at the time, into one of 20 different categories. Right? That was what we knew how to do. And furthermore, we knew how to do that real time. So I'm going to... This video is a bit tedious. There's a picture of real time recognizing things. So that's great. So we've got some nail to hit, and we've got a hammer, and we're going to try and hit it. So what do? We say, what we're going to do here is make training images and pretend that the human body is broken up like cows and sheep, etc. Right? So we're going to use the semantic segmentation because it's the only tool we have, and we're going to try and predict left hand, right hand, etc. Long story gets shorter in the sense that it turns out that works fine. Oh, sorry. So input image, colors. So right hand should always be orange, even if it's on the other side of the image. And it mostly works, right? So if we watch the right hand there, you know, it mostly stays orange even when he moves it over to the other side of his body. There were some other technological advances here that proved important. One was we do the machine learning completely new on every frame, or we run inference completely anew on every frame. Again, that seems insane, right? You know, if your tracker's already working, and it was working 30 milliseconds ago, then they can't have gone far in 30 milliseconds, right? That's great if your tracker's working, but there's 100 reasons why it might not work. And if you're depending on frame now working, then you're multiplying the probability of failure. So if you're 99% successful per frame, then 0.99 to the power of 25, which is, you know, a second, or power of 30, is already some small number. 0.99 to the power of a minute means all the thing is failing all the time. We ran with that for a while, so we tried to design games where you always end up in this pose. You know, sort of every 30 seconds you have to go into this pose and the system reinitializes, and then you... but, you know, it wasn't satisfactory. The other funny thing about the 99% accuracy per frame is if you make it 99.9, it doesn't extend the playtime very much. Right? So 0.999 to the power of numbers might give you 5 minutes of playtime rather than 1. So it's completely useless to make the per frame accuracy better if you're going to be depending on the previous frame. So instead, it works at some horrendously low accuracy, like 70% of pixels are correct. But because it's a different 70% every frame, and then you bring in the temporal coherence afterwards, it meant that it was always recovering. So that was a kind of a key move. All right, so that's Kinect. That was fine, that shipped. It's really interesting. I sometimes say probably cost us, these are made up numbers, but probably cost us $1 billion to make Kinect. We probably made $1 billion. So it probably made us $0 billion, the whole thing with Kinect. But on the other hand, it gave us marketing of having like solved some hard problem, which we couldn't have paid for at all. So for $0 billion, we got good marketing for, you know, having done something innovative. And of course, the side effect that Kinect is now useful in a whole bunch of other domains other than gaming. It's very funny. Almost everything on the Xbox bus is heavily encrypted to stop people cheating at games. Right? It's really important that people don't cheat at games. So it's really, really hard, for example, to make your own Xbox controller. Why? Because you would just drive one from an Arduino or something and generate much better signals. So it's really heavily encrypted, the connection between the controller. Funnily, for some reason, Alex Kipman forgot to encrypt the depth data coming off the Kinect. So, which led to the side effect that the Kinect worked for everybody, and you could just grab it and play it. Amazing loss of concentration from Alex, who's normally super detailed about things. Okay, so I'm going to tell you one more story, and that story is how we get to the video of Julia playing with the articulated hand tracker, starting with this sort of random research problem that we had in 2000, and it's probably almost 10 years ago, probably 2009, I think Tom came to Cambridge. So what was the problem we wanted? Again, I wanted to do 3D reconstruction from multiple images, but it was boring to use interest points. Right? It was easy and solved if you could track interesting points on an object. And the thing is, most of the stuff we looked at doesn't have interesting points on it, right? So humans are continually wearing striped shirts or plain clothes. There are lots of situations where you can't get high contrast feature points on your object. But the reviewers were always sending back saying, oh, this is stupid, you just use feature points, stop with your silhouette, stop with your nonsense. So we kind of invented this hard problem so that there wouldn't be enough feature points. And the hard problem was, instead of doing multiple images, so it was known, or reasonably known, how to take multiple images of the same 3D object and pop out a 3D shape. What we wanted was multiple images, each one of a different 3D object, but where the 3D objects had some common parameterization. And the idea was, if we could just recover simultaneously all the shapes, then we could take this image of whatever class there is here, segment the image. We were assuming you could do that. You could just, there are a few feature points. You could detect like the tips of the fins. There are about 6 feature points on a dolphin that are consistent between different dolphins that you can talk about. We could have gone more, we could have gone some in here and so on, but let's say 6. And the idea is take that set of images and then given a rough outline, a rough template, which we could have made a sphere. In the end, we just made it a dolphin, but it doesn't matter because what we want to learn is not the template, but these sliders which change the shape. So for each input image, there's going to be a different set of slider values, which you don't know, and those slider values are controlling 8 basis shapes, which you don't know. Right? So our job, given the input images, is recover simultaneously the basis shapes and the slider values. And then the idea is if you've got a new image, then you could just pop out a 3D model. Right? And we kind of had some dream that we would do the whole thing live online, right? So you had an image of a dolphin, you would go to like Bing Images, find a whole bunch of others, learn the characteristics of that shape that you were interested in, pop it. You know, we didn't really have a good idea of how we were going to make money using this technology, but it felt like a good thing to be able to do because it was hard. So, yeah, and then as I said, one of our ideas was, wouldn't it be cool to pop out the model from an image? Okay. So, what do we do in order to try to solve this problem, right? So the problem is 36 images in, or some number of images in, 3D model out, one model per image, so a separate model for each image, which somehow have something in common, right? So you can feel a manifold, you know, of 3D shapes and generating from the manifold. You can probably hear all of that. So what do we do? Well, the first thing we did was the bit that you have to do all the time. I'm against theorems. I'm not against maths. Maths is great, right? So you write down some maths. You figure out what it is that you're going to use, right? We knew the maths for feature points. We knew how to do that. We also knew that people knew the maths for silhouettes. So silhouettes are really complicated, right? Because the outline, the silhouette of a 3D shape changes as you change your position with respect to the shape. Not only does it change, but the points on the surface that correspond to the silhouette slide around the surface as the camera moves. And remember, for each of these images, we don't know the shapes. We also don't know the camera position, right? That's just, we don't know the orientation of the object. So we therefore have no idea which points on the surface, even if we knew what they were, give rise to the silhouette. But, you know, at least you can start naming things. So we had things called the contour generator. These are not our names. These are like from the literature from a long time ago. So the contour generator is the curve on the 3D surface that generates the 2D silhouette. That's the name for that thing. We knew we were going to make our 3D shape out of a triangle mesh, but it wasn't just going to be like a planar triangle mesh. It was going to have some sort of spliny thing on it. So we knew that the 3D surface would be made of curved triangles, and each of those curved triangles would be a projection of a sort of a 2D triangle, right? Just like a normal polygon face. And we would have things like, inside a 2D triangle, you can use 2 coordinates to say where you are. To say where you are on the surface is kind of weird. You have an integer, which is which triangle you're in, and then 2 coordinates, which is where you are in the triangle. So it's kind of a messy thing to do mathematics with. But if you remember my claim that everything is piecewise, remember I said use an if statement rather than a cubic polynomial. Well, this is just the same. The integer is just saying there's a kind of a discrete bit, and then there's a continuous bit which says where you are in the triangle. Okay, so we looked at this, so we got like names for the stuff that we didn't know. Then we looked at the images, right, and gave names to the stuff that we did know. So what do we say? We said, well, I've got this image, I'm going to divide it into a silhouette, and in the ith image, I'm going to divide it into, I don't know, 200 points, completely random number, sample it. You might think of all sorts of clever strategies like, oh, you should sample it like according to the curvature so that you get the right sampling. Completely irrelevant, because the curvature here is not related at all to the curvature on the surface. And anyway, the surface is different all the time, so the curvature changes all the time. So you don't even need to worry about that. You just sample some number of points around the object. So there's 2D points, sample ij. And then there's a 2D normal associated with each of these, which you just get by doing a little bit of image processing. I used to be against normals because they're not real data, right? They're derived from the data that you've already got. But now I've realized that they're actually handy. They're like a little shorthand for all the data around this point. So it means you can sample a little less densely if you package up the normal with the data point. But that's, yeah, I used to always try and do it without normals. In fact, we tried to do HoloLens many times without normals because they're like 4x more expensive to deal with because of a divide by root n. So that's the data samples and their normals. We have, in a given image, an unknown camera position, so think of that as 6 numbers, like orientation or an affine camera or something. Some function pi, which does perspective projection. And that function pi explains how the 3D points here got into the image. What 3D points? The 3D points on the contour generator. What contour generator? Because you don't know it. So you just add some unknowns. So there's these points U on the surface. So for every image, for every silhouette point, let's say 200 silhouette points, I'm adding 200 unknown 2D vectors, which are what the contour generator is. And this is just generally a good strategy, right? Just keep writing down the stuff you don't know and pretend you know it, right? So just, chuck in the variables for the stuff you don't know. And then there's the formula here which says spliny thing given the vertices, which I'm not drawing here, but the vertices that describe the surface. Given all the vertices, that's like a 3 by 500 matrix. And a 2D point, push it through the spline, push it through the camera projection, and then it should land up here. Right, that's what you do. And I don't have it here, but you can write down an equation which is a sum of these guys minus these guys. Why don't we do it? Let's do it. So what do I want to minimize? I want to minimize over all the unknown cameras, the unknown 3D surfaces, the unknown U's, well, some sort of sum over all the images, and then each image I'll sum over all the points. I'll only do the surface bit, and then I take the ij sample, project through the camera a 3D point, m of u ij x I. Okay, so that's our minimization problem. So let's count our knowns and count our unknowns. Let's say we have 50 images. Let's say we have 100 images. And in each images we have 200 points. So that's 20,000 2D points that we've got as measurements. What don't we know? Well, 6 numbers per image. What did I say, 100 images? So that's 600 numbers, so that's fine. We haven't blown the budget yet. ODRAT, right? For every 2D point, we've got 2 unknowns. So we've blown our knowns versus unknowns budget straight away. And worse than that, for every image, we've got a 3 by 500 matrix of 3D points, of vertices that we don't know. Let's fix the second problem first. We're going to say, don't min over the xi's. That was like a completely different shape for every image. Let's say that xi is some linear combination of some basis shapes, alpha I b, times basis shape b. So that's a 3 by 500 matrix. That's a 3 by 500 matrix. And if we have 10 basis shapes, this is 15,000 unknowns. And this is just like 10 per image. So we're good. We got our budget back from the shapes, but we're still in deep trouble because of the UIJs, right? And then what do? You say, oh, the UIJs should be smooth, right? Piecewise smooth, because as we'll see in the optimization, look, this point has a similar, the contour generator of this point, or if I draw on the contour generator, clearly smoothly goes along the surface until we meet this fin, where suddenly, if you think about the pre-image of this point on the Dolphin, it's down there on the body. This is up here on the arm. So there's a sudden jump in where the pre-image came from, as I move backwards and forwards here. 1147. What do? You write down the equations, stick them into Levenberg-Marquardt. What I want you to recognize here is just, if you did this thing with gradient descent, A, it would take weeks, but B, you would reach one of these things and say that's definitely a local minimum, right? Or if you're very foolish, you'd say that's definitely a local minima. You would say that's a local minimum. It almost never is, right? I have a whole other thing that I could show you. It almost never is. You've just stopped. You've just flatlined, typically with gradient descent. So don't say local minimum unless you're really, really sure, and I tell you you're not. Second order optimizer does a great job, gets you out of trouble. We tried it for pigeons. Works fine for pigeons. Sorry about these videos. Everything's been transpiled too many times or transcoded too many times. Works terribly well, terribly badly for polar bears. Right? Because they're not well described as a linear combination of basis shapes, right? They have joints in them. right? And which meant, so you can see it's just like hauling the surface up to match the point constraints, but nothing else is really sensible. This was one of those times where we thought, oh man, like the obvious thing to do is put a skeleton in there, go full computer graphics or computer game, right? And rig the thing and put rigging in and blend shapes and it could do bananas. But we were like, oh man, that's so much work. Anyway, luckily, that was only me moaning, and Sharam and Don Taylor and all sorts of sensible people said, don't worry about it, we'll stick in a skeleton. We don't know how to do anything with it. So what are we going to do? We're going to turn it into a hand tracker, because that's interesting, and that's a skeleton, same as a polar bear. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could look at the Kinect, look at the hands, and then, like, I don't know, we had this idea of shopping on your TV, so you could, like, go through the Netflix. Anyway, none of that we've done, because it all went into HoloLens. So wouldn't it be great to have a great hand tracker? It was a really, really good hand tracker. The way it worked was, and this is another good idea, it was like, oh, we have no idea how to make that Dolphin-y stuff do hands, right? It's just way too complicated, it's got meshes, it's got stuff. Let's just render at every frame 200 guesses, take the one that's closest to the image, and then re-render, so particle swarm optimization strategy. So I think we rendered 8,000 renders a second. And you sensible on the GPU and you tile up the renders, and it worked really well. But the problem is, I think it was running on two 750 watt GPUs. So not great if it's running on your head because of the temperature and battery life. Okay, so that was great, but really slow. So let's see, and I'm just going to abbreviate this. How do we turn that into something that works on the HoloLens? Well, the first thing we did was rendering polygon mesh, because that's the fastest thing to render, and it was low resolution images. There was no need. So there's no need to go to a smooth surface model in terms of quality of explaining the data. So remember, my goal now is to make this thing that runs in 750 watts, or 1500 watts, or whatever it is, run ideally in about 100 milliwatts. Right? So I've got to make it about 1,000 times faster, at least, or 10,000 times faster. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to go to a nice smooth surface. So that's going to make it 5x slower. So that's a good idea if you want to make your code faster. I'm going to replace sort of ICP thing. I'm going to replace some existing state-of-the-art stuff which had a small number of cylinders, which makes it fast to do a closest point computation. If you've only got 20 cylinders, then you can do a closest point computation to the model really quickly, whereas ours, you had to do a closest point to a polygon mesh, which is like 500 point to plane comparisons. So we made a more expensive closest point a lot more expensive. So that made it really slow. But then, instead of using particle swarm algorithm, we did what we did for Kinect. So for Kinect, we had to get 10x the 10% of the Xbox. So the way you do machine learning on 10% of the Xbox is you look at how they did it in the 60s. Right? And how they did it in the 60s was where they really cared about compute, was they used decision trees, and that's why that works really well and fast. We had an even bigger compute budget to recover, so we had to go back to the 40s. Because the further back you go, the faster the algorithms. Remember, in the 40s, who's seen Hidden Figures? Some people must have seen Hidden Figures, right? You knew what a floating point multiply was because a human's brain was doing the computation for you. So Levenberg, in the 40s, invented a way to not do too many multiplies when you want to solve a surface fitting problem. And that's the algorithm you go back to. It's almost exactly the same as Levenberg-Marquardt. Sometimes we switch one, sometimes we don't know. Right. And then we got that running on the Surface Pro, which is 25 watts. Works great. And you saw it at the start running on the HoloLens, which is tiny. I'll say a tiny bit about the HoloLens. What is this HoloLens thing? 24 500 megahertz processors. Beautiful machine to work on. None of that nonsense with branch prediction, caches. You can have a cache, but just nice, clean machine, 4-wide SIMD. I'm really proud that one of our loops is cycle optimal, which means the multipliers, every multiplier in the machine is running as fast as it possibly can. You don't often get the opportunity to write code that is cycle optimal.
probably took us about 3 weeks. And it's probably the fact that we then found it really hard to test anything else that means I now work in programming languages and trying to solve that problem. We published at SIGGRAPH 10x faster than anybody else. We needed another 100x. So, in our SIGGRAPH paper, we said it's really important, if you want to do hand tracking the way we do, to do a smooth surface model, including a complicated thing with walking along meshes. I don't know if anyone knows what I mean, but remember I said the triangles have an integer and 2 UVs, so if you fall off the edge of a triangle, you've got to do some bookkeeping and find the next triangle and go on to that. It's a pain to code. We benchmarked, so only 1% of our moves actually required moving over the triangle. So we're like, yes, because this is really expensive. Turned it off, and everything failed. So it turned out that you have to do this really complicated thing for only 1% of your data points, because if you don't, they all back up against the side of the triangle, and it's a disaster. So we said that was important. That's still in there. We said Levenberg was important. That's still in there. And we said machine learning initializers were important. So in the SIGGRAPH paper, we ran some decision trees or something to get an initial estimate. And it turned out we really tried hard. So on HoloLens 2, we have a DNN chip. It's not a massive DNN, but it's a decent sized, you can run a decent sized DNN. So we tried really hard to do the whole thing in the DNN. No model fitting, right? And it turns out, I've learned this, if you want to solve a model fitting style problem, and it's good to solve this as model fitting because you get an explainable output. So when the HoloLens hand tracker goes wrong, if your finger is missing, is down here, and it proposes the hand one finger to the right, you're like, oh, I understand how that happened, I'll put my finger back or put my thumb out of the way or whatever. So you get explainable by doing model fitting, but it's really expensive. So then you say, well, can we just deep learn the whole thing? You lose explainability, and also deep learning is great to get you within a centimeter, which is a great time to start model fitting. It's terrible to get you within a millimeter. You kind of need like a 10 times bigger network to get you the 10x accuracy, and there's no point. Run the model fitter, it was faster. So that was the thing that essentially happened. I'll show you one little video of this thing working, and then we will stop. Here it is. So this is data from the depth sensor. This is the smooth surface model that has been fitted to the data every frame. Those blue dots are our closest points. And notice that the blue dots move while the model moves, right? So unlike an ICP style algorithm, where you would first do the blue dots, then move the model, we simultaneously compute derivatives or compute a gradient, both with respect to the point on the surface and with respect to the model shape. And that gives you just massively improved convergence. So there we go. I'll go back to my conclusion slide, which is, oh, it doesn't look bad to you. So conclusion, I love maths, I love C++. You need them both together, and it's really good to try to solve a real world problem. Now you might say that's not consistent with attacking the dolphin from images problem, but I'm going to say there was still something real world about it, right? We still knew what we wanted to achieve, and there were a whole bunch of things we never solved on that. Like we thought, wouldn't it be great if instead of solving from we used to start from a rigid dolphin template. The argument was go to TurboSquid, you'll find one, or a fish template or whatever. There were lots of things we didn't solve there, but there was a very clear right or wrong that you could just squint and look at it. Reviewers kept asking us for millimeter accuracy. I was like, I have no idea. It doesn't matter, right? The point is this problem is hard enough that you can just look at the results and say, are they working? Right? Now you might not get away with that with lots of reviewers, so you've got to think about other things. But the message is the same: do something real. Thank you.
Right, I think we have time for maybe 2 questions before we enjoy Lakeside. So anybody want to have a go? Now's the time. Well, I don't have any questions, by the way, right?
Oh,
I was going to say, so you said the HoloLens and the model fitting on the hand,
Yep.
and you said if it loses a finger, you just put the finger back.
Yeah.
What if you don't have that finger?
Yes, so I don't know if it's actually implemented yet, but definitely two plans.
Mm.
One is just have a custom model.
Yeah.
You know, just we could make more
Whichever
models
digit you're
for,
missing, yeah.
for various missing digits. I'm not sure what the plan of record is because I don't work there. And the other thing is most of the user interface. So basically there's a prior that says if something's missing, kind of fold it up.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are missing a finger, the model will just tend to keep
fold
it
it
down
away.
here. But of course it will sometimes think it's these three, not these three. So there'll be a bit of jumping that way. I can't remember what the official plan is, but it's not terrible. You can still use it even if it's missing a finger. We also found images on the internet of people with 6 fingers, but they all seem to be fake. I don't know if anyone knows of a real one. They all looked a bit fake.
They tend to get removed at birth.
I see. Right.
Thanks for a fascinating insight into that work. I wanted to ask you about this research or engineering, and whether you had a rule of thumb to tell you whether the next step you need to make is a research contribution or an engineering contribution.
Interesting. So there's definitely the following rule. That thing that you keep putting off because it's such a hassle, do that. Right? That thing that you're always saying, oh, maybe I'll read some more theorems or something. There's normally a big lump of engineering in one's near future that one is putting off. And I say do that. Mukta did the first matrix bookkeeping for Finding Nemo, and Tom did the bookkeeping. These things like this bookkeeping of which triangle you're in. It's just, definitely feels like engineering, and it definitely feels like, oh, maybe if I treat this as an implicit function. You think surely maths can get me out of this. So I don't know if that answers it. So always do the engineering. Maybe is the answer. But then does that mean just hack it till it works? No, it means sometimes sit back. It was brilliant moving to HoloLens because we really had to sit back and say, look, I've been spouting this lifting function, stuff for a long time. Is it really necessary? So we did properly turn stuff off. We also I didn't tell you our surfaces were 4th order because that was what the maths of subdivision says. We eventually got them down. Here's a big key thing just to show that we were wrong about something. So we said in the SIGGRAPH paper you can't use polygons, you have to use a smooth surface, and we went straight to 4th order. So then we went down to 3, 2, this is all hard work, this is all 3 weeks work to implement each of these efficiently, to find the efficiency. 3, 2, so 2 was still working, and we went down to 1, which is polygon. Phew, luckily that still doesn't work, SIGGRAPH paper correct. And then we went to 1.5, which is the surface we use is polygonal, but the normals are Phong shaded. So it turns out that's the model that's actually running there. So I don't know if that's an answer or just an aside.
Okay, there's one burning one there, yeah. Okay, so you mentioned that now model fitting is working faster compared to the deep learning one, right? And do you think are there any applications that we will have to stick to model fitting or mathematical solutions regardless the tremendous progress on CPUs, GPUs, and everything?
I think this thing I was saying about explainability, you get the run your deep learning, do all that, get everything. If you have a situation where you can fit a model, then it just gives you such a clear, independent indication of whether or not the deep learning has worked. Because we know that the deep learning could, get stuck on a tree or something. And we don't really know how to stop it doing that. Feed in more training data. So when you fit a model, and we do 1.5 iterations of LM or something. We don't do 40 iterations. We do a tiny amount of model fitting. When you fit a model, you just get this number which is correctly calibrated. It's each of the data points is within 1 millimeter of the model. It's a real world measurement. So that's a real advantage of model fitting, where you can do it. But to do it well, so the system personalizes for each hand, right? So it's really good if you're going to fit model that the model fits So for every hand that comes into the system, for every user of the system, it's like shrink wraps the model onto their hand to get a more calibrated measurement. So explainability is the answer.
Okay, so does it have to be explainable to be counted as science? As a follow-up question.
Science.
Yeah, I mean,
Predict my feeling on science.
yeah, but still I'd like to hear it.
All right.
Because I need proof, right?
So what is science? Science is explaining something about the world, ideally in a way that makes you, make further predictions, not just further predictions, do stuff, right? So science leads to transistors, I would say. If I do bits of neuroscience, there's science in there. So it leads to predictions about how the brain might work, which you might be able to turn into a therapy. We always talk about the utility. At the same time, whenever I'm talking about mathematics, teaching mathematics to young people, I always say, your teacher's got me here to tell you how useful mathematics is. Right? Look, HoloLens, look, Kinect, exciting. Okay? But poetry is also useful. Right? If you want to make a pitch to a venture capitalist and you understand the rhythm of language, you understand about not ending on an unstressed syllable. Right? These are important tools that you can use to make money. Right?
It's a science.
But we don't teach poetry because it's useful, we teach it because it's beautiful, and we should teach mathematics because it's beautiful. That's fine. I'm happy with that. And then science is somewhere in between.
Okay, so let's thank Andrew again for the very